Everyone. Good evening, everyone. All right. I have to say, when I first came in here, I thought they were giving out free TVs in here. And I was just amazed at the response that we're getting tonight. So thank you for coming out. This is awesome. My name is Ash Richards. I'm the Urban Agriculture Director at the Philadelphia Parks and Recreation Department. And before I begin, I'm going to welcome up Dave Wilson from the Managing Director's Office just to kick us off for tonight.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Dave Wilson. I'm the Deputy Managing Director for Community and Culture, which Parks and Rec is one of the operating departments of. And I want to welcome you tonight to the library here for what I can see is going to be a lot of exciting and entertaining, maybe entertaining not to be the right word, hard work that's going to go forth. On behalf of the Managing Director and the Mayor, I want to acknowledge that we see the work here that you all are doing in this session and in the preceding sessions or following sessions to be very important. And I want to thank you for the time that you're taking now. I want to thank you for your talent, and I want to thank you going forward for a plan that we are very much looking forward to integrating into our community and social infrastructure. So thank you.
I want everyone to look at each other. Look at your neighbors. Look at your neighbors. Look them in the eyes. Because I love theatrics, because you are witnessing something truly incredible. For the very first time in Philadelphia's history, we're about to embark upon an urban agriculture plan for the city of Philadelphia. How cool is that? Absolutely. So thank you for coming out tonight. I also want to thank the facilitators. Raise your hand if you're facilitating tonight. There's facilitators in the room. I want to thank the library staff for helping us put this together, and the interpreters tonight, Dana, Megan, and we also have a Spanish language interpreter, Catherine, tonight, who's also here. Catherine, Spanish language interpreter, if you need her. And Dana and Megan right here are both our ASL interpreters, so this whole event is going to be translated into ASL. So, now, growing from the root. We came up with the plan name Growing from the Root because of the significance of growing from something that is interconnected, secured, and also based in history. Growing from the root is a radical act. It helps us think about the new possibilities while maintaining accountability for what comes next. The roots represent our ancestral practices and signifies our unwillingness to give up. I'll say that again. It signifies our unwillingness to give up. Lastly, roots represent the nourishment that comes from the collective work as this process that we're about to embark upon tonight. And we believe, our planning team believes, that collective work is what makes us powerful. So we're going to get into the presentation and the agenda for tonight, but before we do that, I want to first and foremost recognize the fact that we're talking about land tonight. And I want to contextualize that conversation by honoring the original stewards of what is currently known as Philadelphia. And we want to honor their history, their presence, resiliency, and resistance as an important foundation of this city's plan and also the agricultural movement today. So please give a warm welcome to Trinity Norwood of the Nanticoke Lenape Tribal Nation, who will lead us in a land acknowledgement.
The land upon which we gather is part of the traditional territory of the Lenai Lenape, called Lenapehoking. The Lenape people lived in harmony with one another upon this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were removed west and north, but some also remain among the three continuing historical communities in this region: the Nanticoke Lenai Lenape Tribal Nation, the Ramapo Lenape Tribal Nation, and the Powhatan Lenape Tribal Nation. We acknowledge the Lenai Lenape as the original people of this land and their continuing relationship with their territory. In our acknowledgement of this continued presence of Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tenaman that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land. as long as the rivers and the creeks flow, and the sun and moon and stars shine. Wanishi.
My name is Mabel Negrete. I'm one of the organizers for Indigenous 215, and also I co-lead the Indigenous Peoples Day in Philadelphia. So I was invited to speak a little bit about like the acknowledgement of the land and also the importance of the lands, not only in the context of what is today for the displacements of the Lenape people, which is all over, not only here in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but also in Oklahoma, in Canada, and other parts of the country. But it's also to bring attention to the Native American community that lives here and who are in the diaspora from different communities, not only within the boundaries of the United States, but also within the continent, both of North America, Central America, and South America. I come from the south of the continent. I will be somebody who is considered a Chola or Mestiza, but my indigenous roots come from the south. But it also brings me here for many different reasons, which has to deal with geopolitical reasons. And probably maybe of you knows about it, but Chile is undergoing extreme uprising. In terms, because a lot of it has to do with the inequalities that exist, long inequalities from centuries, between the people who came to this continent and the people who were here already, has always been in conflict in different times in history. So right now we're also seeing one more time an example of that. Both of people who have maintained their language and culture, which is a lot of it has to do with the Quechuas, Aymaras, Diaguitas, Mapuches, but also is like the people who came to mix with the settlers and became a new society in some respect. Similarly is what happens here in the United States. So one of the things that we're trying to do is also bring attention to the Native community here who have been, displaced from other regions. A lot of them are Cherokee descent, some of them Mohawk, are also like Yakama, etc. And so far as our work is also to bring attention to people to understand that once you acknowledge the land, it doesn't matter, the work that you're doing, unless you actually really pay attention to who is here, who is your neighbor. Sometimes you don't understand also like who is an Indian, So those are the things that we're trying to actually bring about and give attention to like the complexity of our history, both continentally and regionally. And that has to do also with the Lenape. The Lenape has suffered a lot of displacement, has suffered a lot of erasure. So one of the things that hopefully this conversation, as you're thinking about like how it could, create an urban environment, an agricultural urban environment, how you can also invite the Lenape from the different tribes, as Trinity mentioned. But there's also the federal recognized tribes that are outside of the state that can also be invited in the future, so that way you guys can maintain some strong, long relationships, and ultimately we can change the history. Because the United States, and that's an example also in the city, the history of the Native American is not told. It's oftentimes marginalized, and I think that is a time for also those changes as we're thinking about land, as we're thinking to be together, and also what kind of nation is being built based on these kinds of activities, or gatherings. So without further ado, thank you. And
Okay. Also, because that's just really important to us, and this is a collaboration, so we are going to figure out a way that we can integrate, of course, the land sovereignty issues that the Lenape are going through, but also all the tribal nations that are touching this land. So thank you for that. Next up, I just want to introduce Kalia Pitts, who's going to open up our ceremony tonight with a poetic opening. Is Kalia in the room?
Yes.
Yes, here we go. Yeah. Please welcome Kalia. Thank you so much.
Hi, folks. My name is Kalia D. Pitts. I didn't practice holding the mic, so we're gonna work with this. I had hand motions and everything. All right. Nope. Did you want to help? Sure. How would you like to help?
Well, I thought you needed help holding the thing.
You're good, boo. Here for the people. Okay. This piece is entitled Sovereign. You cannot own land. No matter how many of her babies you abort or squash under boot and smear onto microscope, inject with corruption and blight, warp, patent, and package. No matter how many dollars you stuff with angry fists into the ground, demanding, dance for me, bow to me, give to me, feed me. It will not be yours. You are but a guest, a steward, a consort begged to plant kisses across her face. But even still, you get aroused watching your fingers reach into her loomy womb, pieces of her hugged along your nail beds, folded into your knuckles. You make payment and scoop her out, empty of all her oils and juices and jewels and assets. You think 'cause you took the best pieces of her home that you own her. But tell me who owns the wind and who has named the raindrops. When the sun runs fingers lightly across the back of your neck and caresses your cheeks, do you believe you are the only one to be touched? Do you think the moonlight bends over backwards just to peer into your bedroom window? Do you hold a leash on the sea? If you think Earth is more malleable because she gives you a sense of grounding, then you have mistaken soil and gem for wet concrete. You have mistaken the prayerful for the inanimate, the quiet for the dead, the servant for the slave, and the mother for the mammy. If you think she is here only as your nursemaid, if you presume to suck her dry, leave her tits empty and swung like overripe fruit, hung, swung in a breeze hot with smog and unholiness, then know that she will only give you enough to keep you wanting more. And as you cry and claw at her back, trying to build skyscrapers out of scabs and scars, she will be moving forward through time to feed on the decay of your descendants. She is a sovereign planet and a kingdom without kings. No matter how hard you force your flag into the ground, no matter how much power you wield, the mountain will not bow and the earth will not yield. Thank you.
Kalia, I don't think anybody was here to. Yeah, we weren't ready. I don't think we were ready. Bless you. Thank you. Bless you. Big ups, Kalia, y'all. That was awesome. Thank you. Woo, we got a tight agenda, y'all. We have so much to do tonight. I'm looking at my team. I'm like, we got so much to do tonight. Look, this is a beautiful team right here. Okay, so without further ado, to illustrate what we've been doing thus far in the process, I'll be co-presenting with a brilliant team of collaborators, including the planning and design firm Interface Studio and Soil Generation, which is a black and brown and Soil Generation, which is a black and brown led coalition of gardeners, farmers, and individuals and community-based organizations here in Philadelphia. Now, Parks and Recreation and our selection committee chose this team because of their ability to incorporate the deep analysis of environmental justice, race, class, and economic disinvestment throughout the planning process. We also chose them because of their prior experience with citywide planning initiatives and their awareness of the history of land changes and development in Philadelphia. I'll be joined tonight by Katrina Baxter. Y'all raise your hand if you can. Soad Mana, Sonia Galibert, Ashley Gripper, and Mindy Watts. And of course, we're grateful to have Paul McGee, Ashley DeCaro, Chris DeSassi, Scott Page of Interface Studio, and Lon Din and the coalition, y'all are here tonight, the Coalition Network of Soil Generation for their work on this plan. So thank you all. All right, so this is important. Within the planning process, there's going to be many opportunities for residents to provide input, as the project team will seek guidance from residents, growers, and key organizations in the city at every stage of the plan. And these levels of engagement allow us to have multiple levels of transparency built into the process. Now, this graphic shows a very robust community engagement and process that includes, at the center or the core, the project manager, which is myself, and the consultant team working at the core, tackling day-to-day aspects of the plan and responding to the constant flow and response from residents and feedback from growers. Next, we have a project team, which is composed of city representatives or relevant city agencies to support the plan in ensuring that we have the funding to make this process successful. And we also need them and lean on them to ensure that we can implement this plan and also instill accountability within this plan once it's completed. And of course, next we have an incredible steering committee. Raise your hand if you're in our steering committee and you're here tonight. Okay, yes, okay. The incredible steering committee that will guide the work that we're doing. And the steering committee is very special to us because in equal parts it's divided. 1/3 community members are representatives, 1/3 partner organizations, and 1/3 city agency. And the reason why we did that is because we didn't want a steering committee that was full of city agencies. And we certainly didn't want a steering committee that was full of nonprofits. So we made sure that it was equal out throughout. And it's very big and robust. I think we have about 50 folks in that steering committee. So we're covering our bases. Next, the last but important ring is the public engagement process, which is what you guys are doing tonight. Because this plan needs to be grounded in the voices, visions, and values of the people who are most impacted by food, land, and economic insecurity. We will have 4 public meetings in total throughout 2020, year 2020. We'll also conduct oral history projects and interviews and portraits of the diverse community of growers and gardeners in the city. We'll hold focus groups and spaces for focus groups that include topics such as community gardens, market farms, education and youth, workforce development and job creation, anti-displacement, and environmental and health justice. And lastly, we'll be engaging city agencies, the Food Policy Advisory Council, or FPAC, and political figures to ensure that the policymakers know and understand what residents need out of an agriculture plan like this. So how did we get here? I just love this slide. Shout out to Paul. Where's Paul?
Yeah,
Paul. I just love this slide because it represents how important it is to be involved in this process and how your words will inform and shape this plan. Again, this is the first ever agriculture plan for the city, and therefore we need your input to shape the strategies and recommendations that will be implemented for years to come, y'all. Now, it's not going to be easy, and I'll be honest about that, but there's staff like myself and some agencies in the city that are going to be working to push this forward and working to push forward your recommendations that you all will help us create. So prior to today, so if you drift your eyes to the very left, you squeeze a little bit. Prior to today, our team has been combing through a database, a garden database, which will be further explored in the presentation. We've also done some pre-planning meetings with the Food Policy Advisory Council, and we also led 2 gatherings in 2017 with the Coalition for Racial Justice, or Courageous. Some of us have supported the first urban agricultural hearings with City Council back in 2016, where there was over 100 robust testimonies given by gardeners and growers in the city. And also some of us have been organizing for threatened gardens over the last year. And of course, we've been collecting information on the urban agriculture history in the city, and you'll see much more of that in the next public meeting, which will likely be in February or March. So tonight, which is you're here, tonight we'll be exploring the current state of agriculture, existing conditions. We'll show you some of the existing conditions that we found throughout our process, and we're asking you to show us your existing conditions throughout your process and how you've been engaging in agriculture in Philadelphia. And we want to see that through your lens. So you see some of these table exercises, that's what we're going to do tonight. At the next meeting, or the second meeting, we'll take a deeper dive into the concepts and issues that come out of tonight's meeting, and we'll begin formulating, formation Beyonce style, the vision for the plan, okay? Like, is there no Beyonce fans in here? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Baychella, anyone? My goodness, it's like a dry crowd. Let's come here. Okay, and then the last public meeting will focus on reviewing the draft plan, and because we're expecting this process to be about 12 months, we should see a draft plan around July 2020. Which sounds so weird to say 2020, it sounds like a sci-fi movie, but I'm so excited. And of course, the last meeting, the very last meeting, will be a big celebration, so don't miss it. If you think the food was good today, we're gonna have lots of food at that meeting, so you have to come and celebrate once the plan is done. This is our first activity of the night. And before we jump into how our team has been defining urban agriculture based on what we've gathered, we're asking everybody tonight to define urban agriculture collectively today together. So on your card, the first prompt says, how do you define urban agriculture? Now this can be as loose or specific as you want it to be. And second is, how do you value urban agriculture? And the reason why this is extremely simple, one, is because at the bare minimum, we all don't come from the same values, and we're trying to create a shared vision or a shared plan. This is the start. We have to start somewhere, and we start at how we even define urban ag. Does that make sense? Okay, does that make sense? Okay, very good. So I'm gonna ask everyone to take 5 minutes, center yourself, and just fill this out. We're gonna all do it together collectively if you can, because this is, and then at the bottom, if you feel comfortable seeing your words show up in the plan itself or throughout the process, you check that box and leave your name and your contact information. Does anybody have any questions about this exercise? Don't be shy, just raise your hand and someone will come assist you. So we're gonna take 5 minutes, y'all. 5 minutes to take this, or maybe about 3 minutes. 3 minutes to do this exercise. But if you don't get to do it now, don't worry. We're gonna have time to do it later if you would wanna stick around after the presentation. If you are done, again, collect it up and we'll take it up. And thank you for doing that. The reason why we're doing this exercise is because when you come to the next meeting, because I know y'all are gonna come to the next meeting, right? Yeah. You will see a beautiful array of all of these responses on a wall. And also, remember, this is a tool. This thing is a tool. This is what we take to the political figures. This is what we take to the community organizations, to the funders, to say, over 300 people said that they thought that defining urban ag was about ancestral practice. Therefore, it has to be permanent. You know what I mean? So remember that. So make sure you guys are thank you. Make sure you guys are putting that in there. Thank you, everyone. Again, really quickly, we want to make sure that we do this with integrity. Please stay along for the ride. Help us tell the truth about the food systems and our food systems in Philadelphia. And without further ado, Katrina Baxter. Please welcome Katrina from Soil Generation, who's going to walk us through history, goals, and values of the plan.
All right. Thanks, Ash, again for bringing us in. They've been a great partner on this project with us, and we're really blessed to be able to do this, right? I mean, you know, how many times does the city partner with a community coalition, right, to do this kind of work? So we're feeling really good to be in the room, and we're feeling really good to see all you guys in the room as well. Yeah. So I'm gonna give next we're gonna discuss a little bit of the history, the goals of the project, as well as the values of the project. And my history section is in depth, so listen closely. This is Lenape land. Earlier you heard my sister Trinity. She come up and explained and gave credence to what we know as before. Hundreds of years ago, indigenous people grew food in this fertile river valley. They hunted and fished amongst the 3 rivers that bordered the city. And those same people came and greeted William Penn when he first came and colonized these shores in 1682. Land was seen as the commons and was not owned by one person. Between 1640 and 1840, Pennsylvania was actually known as the breadbasket of America. People probably don't know that, but because of our strategic location and our favorable conditions of soil and climate, Plus, we had a very diverse group of immigrants who had come to this area. So there were Dutch folk, Swedes, Finns, German and Scot-Irish folks, and those folks brought their agricultural practices with them. This created a strength, an agricultural strength in this region here. The city was founded pretty much as an oasis, right, a farming oasis. But of course, the Industrial Revolution stopped that. Actually, I call it a dream deferred. So through the decades, there were many initiatives that sort of sparked an interest or kept an interest in growing food in the city. So we had the Victory Gardens that started around 1917, and during that time, there were about 12 million gardens that were started across the states, right? And that number grew to during World War II, where there were 18 million gardens in just cities alone, right? So when I hear questions sometimes about community control of land, and people are always like, what does that look like, and what is that? Literally less than 100 years ago, that was a reality in this city, right? So through the 70s, around that same time of World War II, there was a lot of migration of African descendants into Philadelphia. At a rapid pace, the demographics of the city changed. There was white flight that picked up in the 50s, and that created a vacuum and a vacancy that black migrant farmers took root in the city and through this way. And through the decades past after the 50s, war ravaged different lands in different countries like Puerto Rico and Vietnam and Afghanistan, and their survivors found refuge in Philadelphia, and they brought their growing practices as well. So in the 1970s, we had Penn State Extension and Philadelphia Horticultural Society. Both started supporting community gardens in a different way. So the USDA had started this program in 1977. Penn State Extension was a part of that. We were Philadelphia, a part of a 6-city demonstration, and we were the best one, the largest one in the country. So that program actually helped the community gardeners who had been there for decades stay and sort of stay in perpetuity, well, not perpetuity yet, but stay relevant, right? And so by the 80s and the 90s, the majority of the community gardeners in this city were folks who had come up from the second great migration of African Americans during World War II, and folks who came from Puerto Rico and Southeast Asian migration that followed the Vietnam War. However, neighborhoods were devastated by deindustrialization, depopulation, or white flight, and segregation, and those folks took over these vacant lots, which were mostly row homes, and began to grow food as well. So although the 90s, during the 90s, there was another relatively large thing that happened for community gardens, and that was USDA stopped supporting that program. So when that happened, pretty much all the resources dried up for community gardeners in this city. The program at Penn State Extension that was for community gardeners had become defunct, and as well, the philanthropy that PHS had experienced before had dried up. So we had experienced a decline. We had been experiencing a decline in gardens from about the 90s until the mid 2000s, right? So there's a big surge in interest in growing food in the mid 2000s. So let's say about 2010, and around that same time, the Public Interest Law Center decided that they were going to do a survey, and they surveyed growers around the city, and unequivocally, folks said that they wanted access to land, and that that land security and access to land were the two largest issues that growers were facing, right? And so since around then, 2011, the Garden Justice Legal Initiative was created, and out of that started Healthy Foods Green Spaces, which was and Fork. I think Fork came first, and did Healthy Foods Green Spaces, which was two of the coalitions that started before Soil Generation. And those coalitions together helped move the city forward through urban ag, through some zoning laws that were going to change and affect about 20% of the gardens in this city here. And they fought that and won, so that we can now have permission to garden in pretty much everywhere in the city, which is big for most cities, right? For a large city as well. And then also they stayed coalesced to make sure that we had really strong urban ag language in the land bank, right? Which around the time was being passed as well. So after the land bank was passed, the Healthy Foods Green Spaces sort of disbanded, and who was left started the soil generation. We knew that we wanted to have more of a grassroots coalition and that we needed more farmers on the ground who were advocating for land and for resources, not just the organizations who were doing urban agricultural work. So soil generation was born out of that time, and then a progression of that was the urban ag hearing program. Was the urban ag hearing that you all, hopefully, most of you in this room, were a part of. So the urban ag hearings that we had, the first urban ag hearings that we had, actually are why we're sitting here today, right? So we're sitting here today because the city said to us about 10 years ago that urban gardening was not a constituency, right? That there wasn't enough people that were really cared about growing for them to care as much. We know that's not the truth now. Now we can look around, right? Look at this room and say that we are a constituency, are we not? Okay, so we want to advocate for the resources we need as growers, and with the city understanding and respecting us as a constituency that deserves to be heard, because no one should be food insecure in this city. All right, and I'm going to let my sister, Sawad, move us forward and talk more about the values.
Thank you, Trina. So, as Trina said, it's a really rich history of farming and growing that we have here in Philadelphia. And so it leads us to this moment. As we're trying to work to put together this plan, we're trying to document and center that really rich farming and gardening history. And in that plan, it's really important to us that we clearly define the processes, the programs that are necessary to make sure that we keep it going for future generations. Within our plan and within our goals of this plan, we're really hoping to center equity and to make sure that this is a plan that is culturally competent, that is reflective of the people who live here in the city of Philadelphia. We're not just trying to replicate previous processes the city has done in the past. We're really trying to be thoughtful and intentional about creating a plan that is racially and economically equitable, that is effective, practical, accessible, responsible, and resourceful. So we really are asking you all to keep us accountable throughout this process to make sure that we are able to do that. With that, I'll pass it on to Mrs. Sonia to talk about the 6 buckets in the plan.
Thank you, Sawad. Hi, everybody. It's so good to see some beautiful faces. I recognize so many of you. Thank you. So out of the work that we've been doing over the years, and we all know that this isn't the first time that we're having community conversations about urban agriculture. So based on these conversations, the team, we put together 6 different buckets of conversation that we would like you all to contribute to this evening. Those categories you can see on the presentation are accessing nourishing foods, which will be discussing ensuring that all Philadelphians have access to the food they need, and that they have greater choice in food. We also have growing in Philly, which will ask folks to think a little deeply about how to preserve the places where we're growing now, expanding the footprint of urban agriculture, especially in communities where people are food insecure, and ensuring that growers have access to the resources they need to grow, like land, water, and tools. For community building and healing, we really want to hear from you all about supporting communities to reconnect with land and practice self-determination, especially among communities that have experienced trauma through displacement and dispossession of land. And of course, what does it look like to practice and preserve and honor your culture through urban agriculture? For learning to grow, we would really love to hear how to share information about growing and gardening, educating and learning intergenerationally, and especially uplifting and valuing the knowledge of the people that already exists. For seeding economic opportunity, we really want to hear about supporting workforce development, job training, and job creation through farming and gardening, creating pathways for people to make a livelihood from farming in Philadelphia, and how communities can benefit economically from farming here. And of course, for food waste, we really want to know what you think about reducing the amount of food that's wasted in the city, collecting and repurposing waste, i.e. compost, shout out, creating a food system that's more efficient and sustainable, i.e. using less energy and waste and can reclaim some water. So if you take a look, each table has a really big sheet on it, and there will be one of these 6 topics at the top of the sheet. what we would really love for you all to do, and we'll get into the activity a little bit later, I just want you all to bear these 6 topics in mind as we move forward, that each of these big conversations we really want to be rooted in the plan foundations that you can see right here. They're health, racial and economic equity, culture, sustainability, and history. Now, we could have had a racial equity, social equity bucket as its own conversation out of the 6, but really those values need to be present in all of these conversations. And so if you can see the sheet, these foundations are actually up and down to the left side, and the roots are going right into the rest of the conversations to illustrate how much we want those values to be present in each of these topics. Thank you so much. And we'll get into the activity a little bit more, but we just wanted to frame that part for you all. Thanks. Next, we have the lovely Ashley Griffith.
Thank you, Sonia. Peace, y'all. So we're going to dig into some maps a little bit. I think I only have 4 minutes to speak, so I'm going to hit on the most important, the things that I think are most important regarding the maps. So before we dive into what we've been learning throughout this plan, we want to talk a little bit about the places that we know people are currently growing. So in Philadelphia, to our knowledge, there are 418 active gardens and farms across approximately 500 parcels of land. So on this map, you'll see the green dots, and those green dots correspond to where those gardens and farms are located in the city. I think you'll notice in some areas there tends to be clustering of community gardens and farms. So here, we've come up with a system to define community garden, or the different gardens and farms in Philadelphia. And I'll just highlight a couple that we have here. We have individual gardens, which refer to privately owned gardens for personal use. We have community gardens, we have market farms, and we have school gardens, just to name a few. We've been doing work to understand the various different types of gardens that exist within our data set. But we'll ask for some help from you just in a few slides. So we are gathering this information to help fill in some missing pieces in our data set. While we have this data of over 418 gardens and farms, there are pieces like, where is the garden located? Is the garden active? Is it inactive? Has it been demolished? What type of organization runs the garden? And questions around land security. Is the garden owned? Is it leased? Neither. So we really are looking to you all to help us kind of fill in some of these gaps in regarding where gardens are and the status of them. So please take the survey that you received in your welcome packet. If you don't want to do a handwritten survey, you can fill it out online. We'll provide the link. And I also want to note that this garden location data will not be shared with the city. It is for the purposes of this plan. So in our database, we see that there are about 141 gardens and farms that are no longer active. And these gardens and farms are no longer active either because they've been demolished and developed. We have them listed as inactive because we were unable to confirm or have evidence that they're currently active. We have gardens that are gone for an unknown reason, and we also have gardens that we just don't have data on. So we also need your help to build out this kind of data regarding where gardens and farms have been lost. If you know of gardens or farms that have been lost, please fill out the Lost Garden card on your table. You should all have, if you need one of those cards, let us know and we can get you some. So food access has been front and center to this conversation. As Ash said earlier, food is necessary. Everyone should have it when they need it. But this conversation is also about food sovereignty and agency and the ownership that we have over our food system and what goes in our bodies. These next few slides will be a series of maps that show where our gardens are located. And, sorry. I don't know how to work this. Can you scroll down? Something like that. Anyway, I know what it says. So these next few slides will be a series of maps that show where gardens and farms are located in relationship to neighborhood characteristics. So basically what we're seeing on this side is that Philadelphia has several areas and neighborhoods that have high concentrations of poverty, right? And we know that a part of the food access conversation is about the cost of food, and that can be a real barrier for some folks who don't have high incomes. I think that it is not okay that it's not okay that capitalism and structural and environmental racism have led to so many people living in poverty. And I think that these next slides show something really interesting. What you'll see is that remember the green dots correspond to where the gardens and farms are located. You see that these gardens and farms are located in neighborhoods that have high concentrations of poverty. You see on this next slide that the gardens and farms are located in predominantly black and brown neighborhoods. We also know that these gardens and farms tend to be located in areas that already have low food access. So one of the things that we believe is at play is that where there has been great disinvestment and disenfranchisement of communities, people have created a way to feed themselves and heal themselves despite the barriers working against them. This last slide is the black and brown populations layered on top of the neighborhoods that have high concentrations of poverty. What we also noticed through working on this plan is that only 20% of the block groups in Philadelphia, so block group is just one layer smaller than a census tract. Only 20% of the block groups in Philadelphia with low food access, so these are areas where there's not a lot of healthy food access, only 20% of those have a garden or farm. That means that there are 80% of these block groups that have no gardens or farms located in them. What that means to us is that we have a real opportunity to think about how we can make healthy local food accessible and affordable to all folks in Philadelphia.
All right, so Ashley just kind of drew that link between food access and land. And so that was something that Katrina opened with the issue of land and land security for the places where we are doing growing and gardening in the city of Philadelphia right now. So the second topic that the plan is really kind of focusing on, and we'll have conversations tonight, is about land and land access and resources to things like quality soil, water, maybe electricity, tools, places to store those tools and store the food that you're growing. So we know that in order to grow crops, people need access to land. They need that access over time so that their crops can take root and they can have multiple growing cycles. And we know that they need resources like soil and water. And so this piece of the plan is part about preserving the places where people are already growing in Philly today. And it is also about looking to expand the footprint of urban agriculture, so finding new places where people can put down roots and grow food and other crops, especially in communities where people are food insecure. And then kind of the third piece of this is connecting growers with the resources that they need in order to do their growing work successfully. So just a few more maps. As we think about land and access to land and land security, we've been doing a little bit of research to understand how neighborhoods are changing in Philadelphia and where development has been happening and where gardens maybe are being displaced or disrupted as a part of that development. So this map and all those kind of colorful dots show all of the building permits for new construction residential building that's happened in Philly over the past decade. And you can see it sort of radiating out from Center City. And those bright blue dots, those are just building permits that were pulled in 2018. And so you can see them really clustered in Point Breeze and in Pennsport, in Francisville, Brewerytown, Norris Square. So kind of the places where if you walk through those neighborhoods, you can really see a whole lot of change afoot. So when we see, this is sort of the same data, just illustrated a little bit differently. So those dark blue areas are showing places where there's just been that incredible intensity of new construction. We know that 1 in 3 gardens that are still active today are in those places where there's been a lot of change and change is ongoing. And then this map also sort of illustrates kind of at the fringe of those areas, places where we see a bunch of gardens located that maybe are kind of at that edge or that next frontier where we need to be proactive about shoring up land security before development pressures move and displace those spaces. We also know that despite all of that investment that's happening in our city and that development, that there's still a whole lot of vacant land and underutilized land in Philadelphia. So over 42,000 lots is what we think. And so some of those properties are city-owned, some of them are not. But as we talked about, expanding the footprint of urban ag, part of that is to kind of understand, like, where are those resources, where are those places in the city where we might have opportunity to put down new roots. So I'll toss it back over to Sonia.
Thank you so much, Mindy. All right, so yes, thank you, Mindy. And I gotta say that, like, Mindy and her team have been able to provide some really amazing data that we as Soil Generation have had trouble collecting, and it's really adding to the picture that we've been trying to paint to folks in positions of power. So it's been really valuable, and we really hope that you all can help us clarify that picture. And on that note, the other bucket that we could really use some help with is the community building and healing bucket. There really isn't a whole lot of data that exists on this, but we know for a fact, as you all demonstrated with your participation, that urban agriculture is so much more than just food and health and agriculture, right? These are spaces where a lot of different displaced families have been able to preserve and practice their cultures despite being away from their homelands. It's also a place where intergenerational learning and relationship building has happened. And it's also a really meaningful way that folks have been able to support their communities to then practice said cultures. And so please continue to hold us accountable in preserving this part of the narrative and adding to this part of the narrative. And again, I just want to reiterate that this is especially important for communities that have historically experienced land dispossession.
And so when we're talking about community, I mean, this is just one example of a visualization of, when we're talking about community and urban ag, we're not just talking about urban agriculture groups, right? Like when you hit one node, it affects so many different groups throughout the city. And so this is just one depiction, when you hit one, how it reverberates throughout.
Okay, so are you tired of sitting? Because we're going to do some activities. So you've heard enough from us. We gave you an overall broad view of what's happening. So really cool steps. And now we really need you all to dig in and talk about and give us and inform us with the information to move forward with this plan.